So today I'm going to run down Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, being new to this series is both a good and a bad thing for me, so keep that in mind when it comes to my overall opinion. Now, I did spend a good amount of time talking with Flamefang, one of my squad, who has extensively played all the previous titles and put in the hours already on Inquisition. So this has helped me to form my thoughts on this title and within the context of the series. Now, the things I love about Dragon Age is its hugely immersive, vast environment that you are at will to just move through in real time or fast travel back to locations you can explore as you wish or follow the main storyline. The questing and side additions are always keeping you occupied, and with people reporting the game taking up to 90 hours plus to complete, that's on par with Final Fantasy VII, so a massive amount to do in this game. Now, for someone new to the series, this game to me felt like a blending of previous games I've experienced, such as World of Warcraft, Skyrim, but those are just my own points of reference to try and illustrate to you what kind of game, what kind of feel this game has. Now, for me, it was a blend of the arcade and the realistic, walking a line between and bringing you an experience that was both fun and challenging at the same time. But be warned, when I say fun, read addicting, you may find yourself chaining side quests together only to notice that half your day has disappeared. One of the things that's so great about the game that I appreciated was the main storyline is directly bound to the side questing. Progression within the main storyline requires power for your group, and power is attained via completing these side quests and assignments. So in order to push forward the main storyline, you do need to spend time on the side missions. You probably would do this anyway, but it's a good way of making you feel connected to the main story arc, even when you aren't actively involved with it. Not to mention the fact, of course, that some areas you go to are going to be restrictive based on your equipment, your level, and so on, so that often you do need to grow your group before you move forward, and that's a good thing. The design of the overall geography is impressive. It keeps a good balance between linear control to guide you to quest objectives, balanced against a free feeling of exploration. This is important and actually difficult to do because you want the player to have a feeling of self-guidance and discovery, but at the same time not wandering for hours trying to locate a small point of interest within an area. There are also many objects and buildings which bear relevance or give you information to find more useful items when questing. The tactical progression systems for your squad are simple but well designed and reminded me again of mechanics I've used before in my larger gaming pool of experience. That made it intuitive for me with a low learning curve, even though I haven't actually approached this title before. If you are anything above a novice gamer, I would imagine that this would be a similar case for anyone who decides to take a look at Inquisition. You also will unlock skills and paths for your party members to build your group to your own specifications and requirements. And this brings us to the tactical view mode, which at first felt a little clunky and awkward being able to pause real-time combat. Giving orders and then you repeat that with this system to your squad, but once you spend some time with it, it becomes far more natural and a valuable tool. Playing with a group of real users would be best, but this at least gives you a viable system to ensure that your AI colleagues focus on the tasks at hand that you need them to perform in difficult situations. And don't worry, you won't be using it in all combat situations. It only is really necessary for the fine management against larger groups, more difficult mobs, and I guess the most deadly foes that you're going to come up against. The AI also is easily smart enough to be able to support you well in the majority of situations, and this was really pleasing. I usually hate AI support in games, and I do everything I can to avoid it. Most of the time, barring the odd random decision in Dragon Age that I didn't feel encumbered by them. But as I say, there'll never be a human user, and there's just no getting around that. But while we're on the topic of combat, one thing I do want to highlight was my frustration, especially in the early game, that you constantly rely on a smaller pool of healing potions. This felt to me a vastly oversimplified system, with mages not being able to provide actual healing and there being no simple herbal healing. You rely solely on these potions, which you can replenish for free at different camps and so on, but once you go out into the world, that is your only pool. You can't just gather resources in the early game that are nearby, make some herbal stuff. You're reliant on those potions. In the mid to later game this becomes less of an issue, but early on it would be really nice to have some kind of small secondary healing option, and that was for something that really stood out for me. Now, the narrative is obviously the main focal point of Inquisition, and I'm sad to say, for someone like myself who devours narrative, Dragon Age was somewhat baffling to me. Its vague beginning expands into something of not significant clarity. Whilst I felt I understood what was happening and what we were doing, it's been difficult to grasp the overall big picture. Now this could be to do with Inquisition being my first step into the world of Dragon Age, but I think it has actually more to do with the way in which the story meanders its way, without really giving a summary of what our overall goals were. Despite this though, it still feels very enjoyable because what keeps the narrative aspect alive is the banter between your main characters and their range of interactions, and these are not just incidental. Your verbal interactions and choices affect the approval of those in your party. Consistently speaking out in a way that they will disapprove of, you risk losing their support. So the narrative on a local scale actually has an impact on how your journey progresses, and therefore you end up making decisions based on that and forming the character how you want them to be. So all of those elements and the places you go to, the people you meet and the way that you interact, those are the things that kind of kept the narrative and the story going for me. The overall arc though was kind of more, like I say, meandering, and it was more difficult to get a grasp on. On top of all of this, you have the multiplayer, which when set up with a group of friends is some good fun, but I feel lacks true longevity. It's something that you will enjoy and is fun, but unless this is supported long term, I think it's something that's definitely a nice addition, but it's not going to sustain you for the next year. And in many ways, that's arguably acceptable, as this game is after all primarily a single player experience. Overall, my Dragon Age experience can best be described as pleasantly surprising. I do enjoy fantasy games, even though they're not my primary focus as they were in the past. DAI hit the marks for me with enjoyable mechanics, barring a few glitches here and there, nothing that had an overly negative impact on the experience. But with just such a vast wealth of content on offer, this is definitely a game that I'll return to when I want to spend some time resting on my own abilities and not on that of an online pool of random players. There's something very immersive and even therapeutic about a large absorbing single player game, and that for me was the enjoyment of Dragon Age Inquisition. The big question now, I suppose, is should you pick up the game? That's what people have been asking me a lot. Well, if you've never played a fantasy RPG before, I think you could do far worse than Dragon Age Inquisition, and if you're a fan of the genre, chances are you're already playing it. Its learning curve is sympathetic to new players and veterans alike, and I enjoyed it enough that I will certainly consider looking back to pick up Origins. As always guys, drop your thoughts and opinions about Dragon Age Inquisition below, and for more on the game, be sure to follow me here and on Twitch. I'll see you next time guys.